I hike alone because silence doesn't interrupt you. It waits. That October morning in northern Idaho, the forest felt heavier than usual, like the air had learned how to watch. The official trail was clean, marked, boringly safe, exactly what I wanted. But around noon, I noticed something that didn't belong. A narrow offshoot cutting through the brush, the dirt packed down too evenly, as if dozens of boots had passed through recently. No fallen leaves, no branches reclaiming it. I checked my map. Nothing. My GPS still worked, but the compass needle trembled, twitching like it couldn't decide where north was anymore. As I stepped onto the trail, the forest changed. Birds went quiet all at once, not gradually, like a switch had been flipped. The smell hit me next. Old smoke mixed with something sweet and rotten, the kind of smell you only notice when it's already in your lungs. After 20 minutes, my phone lost signal completely. That's when I realized the trail behind me didn't look the same anymore. The trees had closed in tighter, their trunks leaning inward, and the dirt beneath my boots felt soft, almost damp, like it had been turned over recently. I kept walking because stopping felt worse. The cabin appeared without warning. No clearing, no transition. One step I was surrounded by trees. The next, it was just there, squat, windowless, and unnaturally intact. Its wood darkened as if it had been smoked for years. The door faced me directly, like it had been waiting. There were no footprints around it, no signs of life, just my own fresh boot prints leading straight to the threshold. When I touched the door, it was warmer than the air, and the handle left a faint greasy residue on my palm that smelled metallic. Inside, the light died fast, swallowed by stale air and something sharper, like rust and mold and old sweat layered together. The cabin was empty except for a long wooden table pushed against the far wall. No chairs, no bed, no supplies, just the table. And on it, arranged with deliberate care, were several Polaroid photographs, their white borders yellowed and curling. I didn't need to pick them up to know what was on them. I recognized the blue of my tent, the shape of my body, the way my head tilts when I sleep. My stomach dropped as I stepped closer, because the first photo wasn't just of someone who looked like me. It was proof that whatever built this place had already been watching me long enough to learn how I rest when I think I'm alone. My hands hovered over the photographs for a long time before I touched them, like I was afraid they might still be warm. The first one showed me asleep inside my tent, zipped halfway, my face slack and pale in the dim light. I recognized every detail: the duct-taped seam near the zipper, the flattened pine needles under my cheek, even the small scar on my jaw I'd gotten years ago. The angle made my stomach knot. Whoever took it had been crouched inches from my face. The second photo was worse. I wasn't in the tent at all. I was lying directly on the forest floor, arms splayed unnaturally, mouth open wide enough to show my teeth. Leaves pressed into my eyes like someone had arranged them there. Dried blood streaked my nose, thin and dark, as if it had bled slowly while I slept. I had no memory of this, no soreness, no stains, nothing. My breathing turned shallow as I flipped the next photo. It showed me standing on the unmarked trail, awake, shoulders tense, my head turned slightly, toward the camera, toward the tree it had been taken from. The look on my face wasn't confusion, it was recognition, as if part of me already knew I was being followed. I dropped the photo when I noticed something behind me in the frame. A dark shape just barely visible between the trees, tall and bent at an angle no person should stand. I staggered back from the table and felt my boot strike something solid. A camera lay on the cabin floor, its strap twisted like a broken limb. When I picked it up, the metal body was still warm, as though it had just been pressed against skin. The smell of smoke clung to it, stronger now, mixed with something coppery. I turned it over and saw dried flakes stuck near the shutter button. Dark, uneven, unmistakably blood. That's when I noticed there was one more photograph, placed slightly apart from the others, face down at the far end of the table. My pulse roared in my ears as I reached for it. The image showed the inside of the cabin from behind me. My back was in the foreground, my shoulders hunched, my head tilted as I stared at the table. The photo had been taken seconds earlier. I hadn't heard footsteps. I hadn't heard breathing. The air behind me felt suddenly crowded, like something had stepped closer without moving. The cabin creaked, a slow, deliberate sound. And the doctor behind me made a soft clicking noise, as if it had just finished closing itself. I don't remember deciding to run. I just remember the pain. My lungs tore as I crashed through brush, branches clawing at my face hard enough to draw blood. I didn't follow the trail back. I bolted blindly, guided only by the certainty that stopping meant being close to it again. The forest felt hostile now, the ground uneven and slick, like it had been disturbed recently. I tripped more than once and tasted dirt and iron as my teeth cut into my lip. Somewhere behind me, wood creaked, slow, patient, like the cabin settling back into place. I never heard footsteps. That terrified me more than if I had. When I finally burst onto the marked trail, the sudden openness made my knees buckle. I laughed, a sharp, broken sound, half sob, half relief. The signs were back. The sky looked normal. I followed the trail until I reached a small ranger station just before nightfall, parked my tent within sight of its floodlight, and convinced myself the photos were a stress hallucination. People don't vanish into the woods and build places that watch you. That night, exhaustion dragged me under fast, but sleep didn't feel like sleep. It felt like someone else was deciding when my eyes should close. I woke to fabric shifting softly, deliberately. My tent flap was unzipped, the zipper teeth resting against each other like they'd been carefully aligned. Cold air poured in, carrying that same stale smoke smell, thicker now, oily in my throat. I lay perfectly still, my body locked, pretending to breathe slow and deep. The ground outside my tent creaked once, as if weight had shifted. Then, click. The sound was unmistakable, mechanical, final. I didn't open my eyes until morning light burned through the fabric. Nothing was missing, nothing disturbed, except my right boot felt heavier when I slipped it on. Inside, folded neatly against the sole, was a Polaroid. It showed me lying in the tent, eyes open wide, pupils blown, staring straight into the lens. My face was frozen in terror I didn't remember feeling. In the corner of the photo, barely visible, was the edge of the ranger station floodlight, proof that whatever took it didn't care about witnesses. That was when I understood it wasn't just following me anymore. It knew where I slept. It knew when I slept, and it had started waiting for me to wake up. I didn't finish the hike. I drove home without stopping, hands locked so tightly on the steering wheel that my fingers went numb. I told myself distance would dilute whatever had attached itself to me, that forests don't travel. At home, I destroyed everything I'd taken with me, burned the clothes in a rusted barrel behind my building, smashed the camera I'd brought until the lens cracked like a blind eye. For a while, it almost worked. Weeks passed. My sleep returned in shallow fragments. Then small things started slipping out of place. My apartment door was always unlocked when I woke up, even though I remembered turning the deadbolt. The smoke smell crept in at night, faint but unmistakable, clinging to my sheets. I began waking with unexplained bruises, long finger-shaped marks along my ribs, a dark crescent on my throat, like something had tested how much pressure I could take without waking. One evening, I found damp pine needles on my kitchen counter. I don't own plants. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom and started using the couch, keeping every light on. That's when the package arrived. No postage, no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid of me asleep on the couch, mouth open, one arm hanging limply toward the floor. The angle was wrong, too high. Taken from the corner where the ceiling meets the wall. I tore the apartment apart after that. I cut my hands open, checking vents, pulled apart light fixtures, crawled through the narrow space above my ceiling until dust filled my lungs and my skin burned. There was nowhere for someone to hide. But the photos kept coming, never more than one at a time. Me sleeping, me half awake, me staring at nothing in the dark with my eyes open but unfocused, like I wasn't the one behind them. I started noticing time gaps, hours I couldn't account for, waking up with dirt under my fingernails. The soles of my feet blackened as if I'd been walking barefoot outside. My dreams stopped being dreams. They were rehearsals. Every night I stood in the woods again, following a trail that wasn't there, breathing in smoke that coated my throat. Every night I opened the cabin door, but the table was always empty now, except for a space cleared at the center, as if something had been removed, or was waiting to be replaced. When I woke from those dreams, my hands would ache, my fingers curled as though they'd been gripping something heavy. That's when I realized the photos weren't souvenirs anymore. They were instructions. And whatever had been inside the cabin hadn't followed me home. It had been coming with me all along, waiting for the moment I was ready to go back. I drove back without packing, without telling anyone, following roads I didn't remember choosing. The forest welcomed me like it already knew my name. The marked trail ended too soon, and my feet carried me the rest of the way without hesitation, down the narrow path that no longer pretended to be hidden. The cabin stood exactly where it always had, unchanged, patient, its door slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick and warm, pulsing faintly, like breath held too long. The table waited in the center now, scraped clean except for the camera placed perfectly at its edge. Beside it lay a single note, the paper brittle and stained with dark fingerprints that looked burned into the fibers. Your turn. My hands trembled as I picked up the camera. It fit too well. The weight felt earned. I raised it instinctively, already knowing where to aim. The doorway darkened as something stepped into it, not walking, not crawling, just occupying the space. It had my height, my outline, but its movements lagged behind itself, like a bad reflection. Its face was mine, pulled slightly wrong, skin stretched too tight over bone, eyes too deep and unblinking. I understood then that it hadn't been watching me to learn. It had been waiting for me to remember. The shutter clicked, loud and final. The thing smiled, and the cabin shuddered as if relieved. When I woke, I was back home. The smell of smoke soaked into my walls, my clothes folded neatly on the chair. The camera sat on my desk, a fresh Polaroid resting beside it. It showed me asleep in my bed, the blanket pulled up to my chest. The angle was close, too close. I started noticing more details over the following nights, the photos piling up slowly, always showing me asleep, always from a nearer position. Sometimes I could see the edge of a hand in the frame, sometimes the shadow of a face leaning in. My body began waking before my mind, muscles locking, breath shallow, as if it knew what was standing nearby. Tonight, the photo is different. I'm not asleep in it. I'm lying still, eyes open, staring straight ahead, waiting. The camera on my desk feels warm again, and somewhere behind me, I hear the soft, careful sound of someone learning how I breathe when I think I'm alone. Now, what you're about to hear was sent to me by Evan in Ohio. I haven't changed a single detail. This is exactly how he lived it. I woke up because my wife's breathing stopped, not gradually, not unevenly, but cut off like someone had snapped a switch. My body reacted before my mind did. My chest tightened, my skin prickled, and I lay frozen, counting seconds in my head while the room held its breath with her. The red digits of the alarm clock burned into my vision. 2:17 a.m. The air smelled wrong, stale and metallic, like old coins left in water. When she finally inhaled, it came out as a wet, trembling gasp, too loud in the silence. I turned toward her to whisper her name, but the word died in my throat. In the corner of the bedroom, where the wall should have been empty, there was a shape that refused to settle into shadow. Then another. Two silhouettes stood shoulder to shoulder, tall and unmoving, pressed into the corner as if the room itself had grown something it couldn't contain. My eyes strained, adjusting, begging for a logical outline. But the longer I stared, the more details surfaced. Limbs too still, heads angled slightly forward, as if they were listening to our hearts beat. My wife's fingers clawed into my arm, nails biting skin hard enough to draw blood, and I knew she saw them too. The woman's outline twitched, and I heard something soft and damp, like skin peeling away from fabric. The man shifted his weight, and the floor didn't creak. That was when terror fully bloomed, hot and nauseating. The red glow from the clock caught part of his face, just enough to show that his jaw hung lower than it should. Skin stretched thin and glossy, as if it had been pulled over the wrong skull. The woman beside him tilted her head, and I heard the faint crack of cartilage, slow and deliberate. Their eyes reflected no light at all, just deep pits where something seemed to move behind the surface, like worms under glass. My wife tried to scream, but only a breathless wheeze escaped her mouth. I opened mine to shout, to curse, to do anything, and that's when the man smiled. His teeth were uneven, stained dark at the gums, and one of them was missing entirely, leaving a black, wet gap. From the corner, from the space that should have been safe darkness, came a whisper that scraped along my spine. "You weren't supposed to wake up yet." My hand shook as I reached for the lamp, every nerve screaming that light would make this worse, not better. My fingers brushed the switch, hesitated, then snapped it on. The bulb flared to life with a weak yellow glow, and the couple didn't vanish. They didn't blur or retreat into shadows like sane nightmares do. They stood exactly where they had been, now fully exposed, and the sight of them made bile surge into my throat. They were closer than I remembered, as if the darkness had been compressing the space between us. The woman's bare feet were planted on the carpet, but the fibers beneath them were flattened in long, smeared arcs, as though she'd been standing there for hours, slowly grinding herself into the floor. The man's shirt clung to his chest, darkened in patches that looked wet, the fabric sagging as if something underneath was leaking. Their clothes were wrong in a subtler way too, cut and colored like ours, but worn incorrectly, stretched where bodies didn't quite match the shape they were imitating. When I met the woman's eyes, my stomach dropped. They weren't focused on my face. They were locked on my chest, tracking the rise and fall of my breathing with sickening precision. Her lips twitching each time my lungs filled, like she was rehearsing the motion. My wife whispered my name, her voice breaking, and that sound seemed to give the room permission to rot. The air grew thick and sour, heavy with the smell of sweat and old blood. The man took a step forward, and his foot dragged across the carpet with a slow, tearing sound, leaving behind a dark streak that pulsed faintly, like exposed muscle trying to close. "This isn't your room," he said, his voice layered, as if someone else was speaking a split second behind him. As he moved, the corner behind them stretched outward, peeling open like wet paper, and I saw it. Another bed pressed impossibly into the wall, identical to ours down to the faint coffee stain on the sheet. Two bodies lay in it, their faces turned toward us. My face, my wife's face. Their eyes were closed, mouths slack in sleep, chests rising in perfect, mocking rhythm. The woman beside the man exhaled sharply, a sound like air forced through raw meat, and reached out toward my wife. Her fingers bent backward as they extended, joints popping, skin splitting at the knuckles to reveal pale, glistening tissue underneath. "You're standing where we should be," she whispered, smiling as a thin line of blood ran from the corner of her mouth. And as the light flickered and dimmed, I understood with a cold, sinking certainty that the people asleep in that other bed were the ones this room truly belonged to. The room shuddered, not violently, but with a slow, sick tremor, like a body trying to suppress a seizure. The ceiling light flickered once, twice, and then dimmed to a jaundiced glow that made everything look diseased. The couple moved again, closer, without lifting their feet, their bodies gliding forward as if the air itself carried them. My wife tried to crawl back, but the mattress sagged beneath her, bowing inward as though something unseen had climbed onto it from behind. I felt pressure on my chest, an invisible weight pressing the air out of my lungs, forcing shallow, panicked breaths. The man leaned toward me, his neck stretching slightly as he did, vertebrae shifting under the skin with a wet clicking sound. I could see pores in his face now, too large, clogged with dark residue, and veins that didn't pulse so much as wriggle. His eyes flicked past me again and again, drawn to the other bed embedded in the wall, like a predator checking its trap. When I followed his gaze, my vision warped, edges of the room bending inward until that impossible bed filled my sight. The versions of us lying there twitched in their sleep. My double frowned, lips moving silently, as if dreaming my thoughts before I could think them. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through my teeth and skull, growing louder until it felt like my head might split. The woman raised both hands, palms outward, and the sound stopped instantly, plunging everything into an unnatural quiet so deep I could hear my wife's heartbeat hammering inside her chest. "We watched you," she said softly, her voice clearer now, almost gentle. "Every night, from the corner, from the place you never look at for long." Her skin began to sag as she spoke, slipping downward in slow increments, exposing flashes of pale muscle and darkened bone beneath, as if gravity had finally remembered her. The man straightened and pointed at me, then at the sleeping version of myself. "You noticed," he said. "That's the mistake." The air tore with a sharp cracking sound, and the wall behind the other bed split open further, revealing endless darkness beyond it, breathing in and out like lungs. My wife screamed then, a raw animal sound, and the couple reacted instantly, faces twisting in irritation. The woman lunged forward, her mouth opening far too wide, jaw unhinging as strings of saliva stretched and snapped. The lights went out completely, and in the pitch black, hands grabbed us, cold, slick, impossibly strong, dragging us toward the space where the wall no longer existed, while somewhere behind us, in that other bed, we continued sleeping, unaware that we were being replaced. I woke up choking on light, not the gentle kind that slips through curtains, but a harsh, invasive brightness that felt forced into my eyes, burning away the darkness too quickly. My body jolted upright on instinct, muscles screaming as if I'd been running for hours. The room looked familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. Every object was where it should be, but wrong in small, unbearable ways. The walls were a shade lighter than I remembered, the paint uneven, as if it had been layered over something older. The air smelled of bleach and something faintly sweet, like decay trying to disguise itself. I heard breathing beside me and turned, relief surging for half a second before dying in my throat. My wife sat up too, her face drained of color, eyes rimmed red and glassy. "This isn't our room," she whispered. The bed creaked beneath us with a wet, sticky sound, and when I pulled my hand back from the sheet, my fingers were damp. Not with sweat, but with something cold and slick that clung to my skin. The ceiling fan above us spun lazily, clicking out of rhythm, even though we'd never had one. Each rotation made the shadows on the walls crawl, stretching into shapes that looked like people standing just out of view. When I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my foot landed in a shallow depression in the floor, as if someone had been kneeling there for a long time and only just stood up. We moved through the house slowly, every step heavy, like walking through a place that resented being disturbed. The hallway walls were lined with framed photos, and my heart sank as I recognized them. Wedding pictures, vacations, holidays. But each image showed us standing slightly off-center, eyes unfocused, smiles pulled too wide. In one photo, something dark stood behind us, its shape blurred, its presence unmistakable. Downstairs, the kitchen clock ticked loudly, each second echoing like a countdown. A pot of coffee sat on the counter, still warm, the surface trembling as if something had just brushed past it. On the fridge, a calendar hung crooked. Our names were written on it in blocky, deliberate handwriting. Today's date was circled so hard the paper had torn. Beneath it, etched deeply enough to scar the metal, were 4 words: "Don't wake them again." Footsteps creaked overhead, slow and casual, followed by a familiar laugh. My laugh, coming from the wrong throat. Wife grabbed my arm, nails digging in as terror flooded her eyes. We backed into the shadow of the hallway just as 2 figures descended the stairs, talking softly about plans for the day, about breakfast, about work. They passed us without looking, without seeing us at all. And as they stepped into the light, I realized the truth settling like rot in my chest. We weren't guests in their house. We were the ones who no longer belonged anywhere solid, trapped between rooms, waiting for night to come again. We learned quickly that the house no longer obeyed us. Doors resisted when we pushed them, their handles cold and slick, leaving behind faint smears on our palms that looked disturbingly like fingerprints. Ours, but stretched, elongated. When we tried to shout, the sound collapsed in our throats, reduced to a weak vibration that never reached the air. The other versions of us moved through the house with practiced ease, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the thin smear of reality we had become. As night fell, something pulled at us, an invisible current guiding us back upstairs toward the bedroom. No matter how hard we fought it, our bodies drifted, feet barely touching the floor. The room was darker now, the corners swollen with shadow, and we were forced into the far right one, pressed together so tightly I could feel my wife shaking against me. I tried to step forward, to break free, but my legs locked, muscles stiffening as if injected with ice. The bed creaked as the replacements lay down, their breathing slow and even. With every exhale they took, I felt something peel away from me. Memories first, then sensation, until my hands no longer felt like hands, just vague extensions of fear. When I looked down, my fingers had begun to blur, edges dissolving into the darkness that held us. Time lost meaning after that. We didn't sleep. We watched. Every night, the same ritual played out. Lights off, quiet settling in, the house sighing as if satisfied. And every night, the corner grew more crowded. Shapes pressed in around us, others like us, pale and half-formed, faces frozen in silent screams, all staring toward the bed. Some looked freshly trapped, eyes still wet with terror. Others were barely recognizable, their features worn smooth, like stones left too long underwater. I tried to close my eyes, but I no longer had eyelids that listened. The replacements would sometimes stir, and when they did, the darkness tightened its grip, forcing us to lean forward to watch more closely. Once, the man opened his eyes and stared directly into the corner. For a heartbeat, I thought he could see me. He smiled faintly and whispered, "Still there." Then he rolled over and slept. I understood then that the corner wasn't a place, it was a role, a waiting room, and someday, when someone else wakes up too suddenly in the night and notices where darkness shouldn't be, we'll be allowed to lie down again. Until then, we stand here, unmoving, watching, proving that no matter how empty a room feels, the corner never is. Well, this is a horrifying story sent to me by a sister. She asked me to share it because it's the greatest fear of her life, and she says she can't carry it alone anymore. Without any further delay, here is her true experience, told in her own words. My name's Megan, and I've always been the kind of person who notices small things, little details most people miss. I parked at that gravel lot because it was easy, and because nobody else ever did. That was the whole appeal. The lot sat behind an old plant supply warehouse that had been shut down for years. No cameras, no lights, no signs saying you couldn't park. Just gravel, weeds, and a busted fence with a gap people used as a shortcut. I worked late shifts, and this saved me money and time. Over months of parking there, I never once saw another car. Not during the day, not at night. I liked that. Still, the place always felt off in small ways I couldn't explain. My footsteps sounded louder than they should have. The air smelled stale, like wet dirt and old plastic. Sometimes I'd swear I heard something scrape behind the building, but whenever I looked, there was nothing. That afternoon, I pulled in like usual, lined up the car the way I always did, and turned the engine off. The quiet came down hard, like someone had shut a door around me. Before getting out, I checked my mirrors, just out of habit, empty. I stepped onto the gravel, and it shifted strangely under my shoes, softer near the back of my car, like it had been disturbed recently. I didn't think much of it. I locked up, walked through the fence, and went to work. I came back just after midnight. It was colder than expected, and the sky looked wrong, too dark, like the clouds were sitting low over everything. As soon as I stepped into the lot, I knew something had changed. I couldn't explain how at first, but my body picked up on it before my brain did. Then I saw it. A black SUV was parked directly behind my car, not beside it, not crooked, right behind it, close enough to block me in. My first thought was that I'd made a mistake, that I'd forgotten someone else used this place. But I knew that wasn't true. I'd been parking there for months, long enough that even co-workers in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania had started joking about my shortcut. I stood there staring at the SUV, waiting for a door to open or a light to turn on. Nothing happened. The windows were dark and the engine was off, but heat rolled off the hood like it had just arrived. The gravel around the tires looked pressed down, uneven, like the vehicle had settled instead of parked. That's when it hit me. Whoever left that SUV knew exactly where my car would be, and they hadn't just passed through. They had come here for me. I couldn't stop staring at that SUV. It wasn't supposed to be there. I had spent months convincing myself this lot was empty, safe, predictable. Now, it felt like someone, or something, had just moved in overnight, and I wasn't supposed to leave. My hands shook, but I tried to steady them as I walked closer, my keys clutched tight between my fingers. The gravel under my boot shifted unevenly, soft in some spots, hard in others, like the earth itself had been pressed down where the SUV sat. The headlights were off, but I felt the car's presence, the weight of it, like it was pressing on me even without moving. I circled my Civic slowly, trying to find a license plate, a note, anything. Nothing. The windows were blacked out, but the windshield fogged from the inside, streaked in ways that didn't make sense. Smudges and hand-like marks that didn't match any normal movement. My stomach knotted when I noticed the driver's side tire was turned sharply toward my car, like the vehicle had been stopped mid-turn, frozen, waiting. And then I saw it. The faint outline of something crouched low behind the wheel, just barely visible through the fog. Not sitting normally, not human, at least not entirely. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone was hiding inside, playing a joke. But the air smelled wrong, sharp and sour, like metal and sweat mixed together, and the hair on my arm stood up. I felt trapped in a scene that was bigger than me, like the lot itself had shifted overnight, taking away all the exits I thought I had. I jumped back, heart hammering, and for the first time noticed the shadows around the lot moving in ways that didn't match the dim light. My Civic's headlights reflected off the warehouse walls, and in that flickering glow, I could see the gravel behind the SUV pressed flat, darkened in patches, like something had leaned or crawled over it. The closer I got to the car, the heavier the air felt, thick and clinging, and the hairs on my neck tingled as though that sport utility vehicle was breathing, slowly, deliberately. I thought about running, but my feet felt glued to the ground. I was frozen until a sudden, sharp sound made me spin around. Metal scraping against metal, slow and wet. Nothing was there, just empty gravel. But the sound had come from directly behind me, close, too close, and my heart leapt into my throat. I glanced back at the SUV again. In that brief instant, the windshield fogged over differently, forming new streaks, as if something inside had just moved its hand across the glass. My fingers twitched on the door handle, ready to lock my car, but I couldn't bring myself to approach further. It was waiting, watching. I knew that even if I backed out slowly, even if I fled, it would remain perfectly aligned behind me, like a predator that didn't need to move to hunt. And as I finally took a shaky step back toward the Civic, I realized the worst part. The distance between us hadn't changed at all. No matter how far I leaned or stepped, the SUV stayed exactly where it needed to be, unblinking, silent, and patient. Something had followed me here, and somehow it already knew me better than I knew myself. I couldn't stop thinking about that SUV. Every time I closed my eyes at home, I saw it, black and still, sitting behind my Civic like it had been there all along. I knew I had to get proof if I wanted to stop feeling like I was losing my mind. So the next day, I dug out an old dash camera I'd never used and mounted it facing forward, then slapped a cheap backup camera on the rear window. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want anyone thinking I was paranoid. The plan was simple. Park in the same lot, record everything, and maybe finally figure out what the hell was going on. When I got there that evening, the lot was empty. Perfectly, eerily empty. I even walked around my car before locking it, scanning the gravel for any tracks. That's when I noticed them. faint, wide tire marks pressed into the crushed stones behind where my car sat, heading straight to the spot the SUV had occupied. They didn't continue past it. No exit tracks. I knelt down and ran my fingers over the gravel. It was cool, slightly damp. Not fresh, not dry, like someone had left it for hours, but the shape of the treads hadn't faded at all. I swallowed hard and felt the first real stab of panic. I'd been telling myself for months that I was safe here, that nobody came near this lot at night. Now I wasn't so sure. That night, I stayed later than usual at work, my chest tight, hands twitching, checking the time every few minutes. When I finally walked back, I kept my phone flashlight on and my bag clutched against my chest. The lot looked normal at first, quiet, empty, but I froze before I even reached the Civic. There it was, the black SUV, right where it had been before. No headlights, no movement, just sitting there like a shadow I couldn't shake. My hand shook as I unlocked my car, heart hammering like it was trying to escape. I didn't even glance at the camera until I got home. And that's when I saw it. Frame by frame, the rear footage showed my car alone for hours. Wind rattling weeds, shadows stretching across gravel. Then, just before midnight, the SUV appeared. Not rolling in, not driving across the lot. Just there. It was like it had been dropped behind me, fully formed, the rear tires pressing into the gravel with an unnatural weight. And then the worst part, the fog on, the inside of the windshield shifted, forming a vague outline of something crouched on the floorboard. No legs, no clear body, just a head tilting sideways, slowly, almost deliberately. My breath caught. I rewound the footage over and over, hoping my eyes were playing tricks. They weren't. The camera had captured something impossible. The SUV didn't arrive. It just existed, waiting, watching, knowing exactly where I would be. I shut the laptop with a bang, heart thudding, stomach twisting, realizing I'd just made my paranoia permanent. Whoever, or whatever, was behind that wheel didn't need to move. It only needed to exist. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I needed to face it, so I went back during the day, hoping the sunlight would make it feel normal. The lot looked harmless, empty, like it always had during daylight, but that's when I noticed the warehouse door. One of the massive, warped loading doors was cracked open, just enough for a person to slip through. I'd passed that building hundreds of times, and every door had been sealed shut, chained, nailed, or warped shut. Now it was ajar. I should have walked away. I should have called someone, but my legs moved on their own. I slipped through the gap and immediately felt the air change. It was colder, heavier, and smelled like a mix of damp wood, rust, and something wrong. My boots crunched over broken glass and scraps of metal. Sunlight cut through holes in the ceiling, but it didn't reach far. Shadows pooled in the corners and seemed to move slightly when I blinked. As I went deeper, I noticed tire tracks pressed into the dust, wide and deliberate. The kind of tracks a heavy vehicle left when it wasn't just rolling, but settling into a space. They led toward the center of the warehouse, disappearing behind stacks of pallets and rusted shelving. My phone flashlight trembled in my hand. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, but I couldn't. Something had drawn me in, and I couldn't leave until I knew what waited at the end of those tracks. I edged past the pallets, and that's when I saw it. The black SUV was there, in the middle of the warehouse floor, engine off, windows dark, exactly how I'd left it, or thought I had. The air around it felt thick, like it was pushing back against me. My stomach lurched as I noticed condensation streaking the inside of the windshield, forming long, uneven lines, like someone had dragged their fingers slowly across the glass. Then came the sound, soft tapping, deliberate, and slow, like knuckles wrapping the glass from inside. My knees felt weak, and I wanted to run, but my body froze. I shuffled closer, heart pounding so loud I was sure it echoed across the empty warehouse. Through the foggy windshield, I saw it. Something crouched on the floorboard, impossibly twisted, head tilted sideways, staring at me. Not fully human, not fully anything I could recognize. Its movement was jerky, wrong, like a puppet in a storm. But the gaze, it felt alive. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my phone, and the tapping stopped at once. Then, all at the same time, the locks on my Civic clicked in my mind like a warning, even though I was 50 feet away from it. I bolted, ignoring everything, ignoring the scrape of metal behind me, the heavy air pressing down as if trying to stop me. I didn't stop until I was back on the cracked pavement outside, chest burning, sweat and cold mixing, knowing one terrifying truth. It had been waiting inside that warehouse all along, and it wasn't planning to leave. After what happened in the warehouse, I never went back to that lot again. I told my manager I was relocating to help my sister in Ohio, and no one questioned it. I stopped parking anywhere I didn't control, avoided the late-night route, even stopped taking my usual shortcuts. I thought selling my Civic would finally end it, that maybe the SUV was tied to that place and not me, but I was wrong. A few nights after I parked the Civic for the last time in my apartment complex lot, I checked the rear dash camera one last time, almost on a dare. The footage made my stomach twist. My car sat under a streetlight, perfectly still, as it should have. Then came the sound. Gravel crunching. My lot is asphalt. There's no gravel. My heart jumped. I froze, eyes locked on the screen. And there it was, back again. The black SUV, no lights, no license plate, sitting directly behind my parked Civic. Not driving in, not rolling to a stop. Just there. The camera caught the condensation forming. Inside the windshield, smearing and twisting in ways that didn't make sense. Like a hand dragging across the glass, slowly, deliberately, over and over. And then the sliver of movement I didn't want to see. Something crouched in the back seat, head tilted, impossibly, staring toward the front of the car. Not human, not fully. Just a shadow of something that shouldn't exist, but somehow did, in the exact spot it needed to be. My hands shook, my teeth chattered. I hit play and rewound over and over, hoping my mind was playing tricks, hoping it was some glitch. It wasn't. It wasn't a trick. It was waiting, patient, calculating. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The next morning, I sold the Civic without touching anything inside. I didn't even clean it out. I was obsessed with the thought that whatever had been inside could have marked me, learned me, tracked me even if I abandoned the car. I started taking ride shares, avoiding parking lots, checking my mirrors constantly, even for half a second. But every time I did, there it was, or something like it. Last week, while sitting at a red light outside my apartment, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and there it was, the black SUV in a different state, different plate this time, but same tire angle, same weight, same unnatural stillness behind me. My chest froze. The steering wheel felt heavy in my hands. The SUV didn't move, didn't follow, didn't signal or honk. It just existed in the space behind me, perfectly aligned, waiting. And the thought that I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. It didn't need to move to get closer, it only needed to exist. Because the moment I leave any car alone, any empty space behind me becomes its space. It doesn't care where I go. It doesn't blink, doesn't speak, doesn't breathe the way we do. It just watches, learning the distance I leave behind, learning me. And the worst part, I know I'll never be safe in a parking lot again, not anywhere, not even in my own driveway.